Hi, so Sir has joined, guys. Good evening.
Good evening, Ajit. Sorry for the delay. My
No problem, sir. No problem. That's perfectly fine. So, guys, as we have, this is the fourth day, and we have Dr. Kanav sir with us to take the session on new drug rules 2019 and ICMR bioethics guidelines. So, we'll not delay it. So, sir has taken our first class. He's from Lovely Professional University. Sir, over to you, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Ajit, and sorry again for the late joining. So I think last few sessions were very useful for all the audience. They had learned a lot about basics of clinical research, ethical practices, informed consent process. So today my focus will be on a total new happenings in India. So we will be talking more on new clinical trial rules 2019, which was launched by Government of India. And actually this particular guidelines which has been launched, it has actually changed the whole clinical research industry in India as a whole. And also for the very first time in this particular guidelines, it has been also differentiating academic clinical trials and also commercial clinical trials. So as an academician and as a researcher, for all those researchers, those who are working in colleges, in academics, or those who are doing PhDs, so they had defined academic clinical trials also for the very first time in this guidelines. So there are a lot of new things. So this particular guideline, before I go further, I will just give you some background about this particular guidelines, why there was a need of this guideline, and why Government of India came out with this update. So one of the main reason, if you go back, like a clinical trial, as we had already discussed, if you go by the definition, the most important part of a clinical trial is it's a systematic study to generate data for discovering and verifying clinical and pharmacological profile. And also in this, the safety and efficacy of any molecule is the priority. So when we talk about clinical trial, the first thing what comes to our mind is safety and efficacy. So going back in the Indian clinical trial history, so we have to go back dated 2005, because 2005 was an era. I still remember in 2006 when I started doing my master's. So actually that was the year when the whole change was happening. It was in very early days of the change. So in 2005, I think very few researchers will know, in India, there was a big change on the patent law of India. So before 2005, the patent law was actually process patent. So in India, for example, whatever the molecule, for example, if a foreign company comes out with a molecule, so in India, they were doing reverse engineering in those days, and they were very smart. So what they were doing was they were doing reverse engineering, and they will change the process little bit, and finally they will get the same product. So once you get the same product, the molecule can be patented because the process has been changed. So before 2005, it was process patent. But because of this particular law, many of the international pharmaceutical companies, they were hesitant to come to India because they were afraid that they will lose their like marketing rights or patent rights because of this law. So in India, there was not much of investment was coming in the pharma sector. And not only that, the critical drugs, they were getting delayed in reaching India because many of the companies, they were not willing to launch molecules in India. So Government of India took this into consideration, and after 2005, the patent law became product patent. So product patent is nothing but, so whatever process you use, if your final product is same, you cannot get a patent for it. So for example, if you use A plus B plus C to get D or any other way, so if your end product is same, you will not get patent. So because of this big change in 2005, that is product patent, lot many pharma companies across the globe started coming to India, and clinical research industry started growing in India. So it was early 2006, 2007 days when it started growing. But in those days, the regulations were there. but whether they were followed properly or not, that was the biggest question. So there were a lot of loopholes, lot of misadvantage was taken by a lot of sections, and I will give you a highlights of that. So if you can see over here, in between 2005 and 2012, there were around 475 clinical trials for new chemical entities, which was not used as drugs elsewhere in the world. So there were around 475 clinical trials, which was going only in India. It was not going anywhere in the world. And more than around 12,000 side effects were reported, which is excluding deaths. And 506 of them being critically attributed to the trials. So over here you can see on 3rd January 2013, Supreme Court of India revoked the power of the regulators to approve the trials for new chemical entities. So Supreme Court of India came very heavily on the regulators which were approving clinical trials, because they were approving clinical trials left and right. So finally, what happened was there were a lot of outbursts. I will be showing you some of the examples. So Supreme Court actually stopped and took out all the powers of the regulators to approve clinical trials. So there was a time in India, in the Indian clinical trial history, when for a very long period, there was no clinical trial was getting approved because of these concerns. So over here, you can see going back dated 2013, many of the young researchers who had started their career in this field. So you should know what had happened in the past. So over here, you can see on October 24, 2013, India Supreme Court demand regulations of clinical trial. Illegal clinical trials create havoc, the Supreme Court quoted. And over here, you can see of business news, clinical trials, Supreme Court wants safety net for new drugs in India. And these are some of the international news channels or paper media which was covering this particular outbreak. The Indian Supreme Court mandates videotaping consent in clinical trial. And BBC was covering like, have India poor became human guinea pigs. And not only that, over here you can see the drug companies are facing mounting pressure to investigate reports that new medicines are being tested on some of the poorest in the country without their knowledge. So as yesterday, Dr. Sarab was discussing about informed consent process. So informed consent is one of the very, very important aspect of clinical trial. Because as in my first lecture also, when I was telling you about the patient principles of ICH guidelines, I had told you about the golden 3 words. The right, safety, and well-being of the patient is the most important criteria for any clinical trial. And to make sure that the patient rights, safety, and well-being is in place, informed consent is the first step in that. So many of these companies, because in India, as you know, the investigators, that is the doctors, are considered God. So definitely, but what happened in clinical trials? Your personal relation should be kept on one side, but if a patient is participating in clinical trial, because the patient trusts his doctor blindly. So if a doctor tells him that, okay, you participate in the trial, or you participate, or you take this drug, the patients will believe them blindly and they will start taking the drugs because the trust is there. But even though the trust is there, it is the responsibility of the investigator to make sure that you are explaining the whole trial to the patient and the patients are understanding the trial and getting participated in the trial. So there were a lot of loopholes with respect to that, and it was covered. And over here, you can see that how poor Indians were used as guinea pig in medical clinical trials. So over here, you can see one of the poor patients was holding a trial medication to be consumed. So finally, what happened was Indian Parliament also started discussing these topics, and India Parliament came down heavily on cervical cancer trial. The panel blast US and Indian organization for alleged ethical lapses in trials. So it was not about 2013, because many of you will be thinking that, okay, all of a sudden Supreme Court came heavily, maybe 1 or 2 trials has gone wrong, but it was not like that. There was a long past loopholes and lapses which has led to this decision by Supreme Court. So this is the article which was published in BMJ, which I'm quoting over here, which stated, which was published in 2001, that John Hopkins admits scientists used Indian patients as guinea pigs. So this article was day back dated 2001. So for all these years, a lot of trials, unethical practices, irregulations were happening, lack of monitoring. So finally, what happened? The Supreme Court framed a committee to come out with more strict and stringent regulations. And that is where the birth of this particular guideline came into practice. So finally, on March 25th, 2019, by Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, Ministry of Health and Family member published this particular guidelines that is called as New Drug and Clinical Trial Rule 2019. And this guidelines was launched in March, and all the pharmaceutical company in the country was given another 6 months time to adapt to this particular guideline. And as you know, so it was launched in March, and the pharmaceutical company got time till December 2019 to completely adapt this guideline. And presently, in every industry in India, these guidelines which are involved in clinical trials, directly or indirectly, these regulations are being followed. And as you know, immediately after December 2020, if you remember, the COVID started hitting the world. We are talking about December 2019, and March 2020, the lockdown happened. Even in the COVID time, this particular guidelines has given a lot of directions to all the pharma industry to carry out the clinical trials. I will be discussing those case studies also, like based on this particular new rule, how it is being used now. So this new rule will bring changes to the regulatory approvals of new medicines and conduct of clinical trial in the country with the aim of promoting clinical research in the country. And this particular guideline has been framed by keeping in view the international regulatory standards and international ethical standards of governance. So this particular new clinical trial rule 2019 are an updated version of some of the documents which are there, like many of you must have heard about Drug and Cosmetic Act. So this particular guideline overrules Part 10A and Schedule Y of Drug and Cosmetic Act Rule 1945. So these were the two schedules which have been overwritten now. So these rules apply to new drugs, investigational new drugs, clinical trials, bioavailability, bioequivalent studies, and also it gives direction for regulations of ethical committee related to clinical trials, BAB studies, and biomedical ethical research. So this is very important. So along with this guideline, ICMR 2019 guidelines, along with this, ICMR 2017 guideline has to be followed for all the ethical conducts of clinical trials. So before I go further, I will just give you a glimpse of this particular guidelines for those who are new to this. So this is the Gazette document. Over here you can see it's a gazetted document which was published on March 19th. Okay, and I will just show you the English version of this. Give me a second. Because whenever the Gazette document is published, it will be written in two languages. One is English you will get, and the first one will be Hindi, followed by English version of that. Just a minute, I will just show you the English version. I'm going down. Yes. So this is the English version. So over here you can see this particular version is known as New Drug and Clinical Trial Rule, which was published. And most importantly, if you see over here, it gives you some of the definitions. Like many of you are actually students. So for you, as I was telling you in the beginning, this was the new definition. If you look at this, that is academic clinical trial, means a clinical trial of a drug already approved for certain claims and initiated by any investigator, academics, or research institute for a new indication or new route of administration or new dose or new dosage form, where the results of such trial are intended to be used only for academic or research purpose and not for seeking approval of central licensing authority or regulatory authority of any country for marketing or commercial purpose. So any clinical trial which was initiated in academic institutes, research institutes, but with not an intention to market that particular product, will comes under academic clinical trials. So these guidelines give you all the things which are required. It have all the forms, documentations which are required for submission process. So that is very, very important. So going back, so I will be just giving you a glimpse of what are the main changes which had happened in these guidelines. Then we will be discussing some of the main aspect of this. So over here, you can see there is a big hike in the fee structure has been carried out for implementation. So over here, you can see about 3 lakh is the fees for phase 1 trial, for almost 2 lakh for phase 2, 3, 4 and BAB studies, and 5 lakhs for pre-submission meeting, 50,000 for post-submission meeting, 5 lakh for registration of BAB study center, 5 lakh for new drug permission and finished formulations or APIs. So the fees has been increased multiple folds because the government has to improve and increase the infrastructure. So this fees actually justify all the requirements. And these are the new forms which I will be showing you. So over here, just note it down. I will be showing you in my slides afterwards all these forms. So form number CT04 is a form which is used for clinical trial application, which has replaced the previous form number 44. That's very, very important to note. So the new form is CT04. Then you have form CT04A, which is an automatic approval information to CDSCO. Then you have form CT06, which is permission to conduct clinical trials by CDSCO. Then you have form CT16, that is application to grant of license to import of new drug for clinical trial. So these are the new forms which has been implemented. And these are some of the salient features of this particular updated guidelines. So over here you can see this particular guidelines, because as you know, the science is ever changing and many new molecules, new developments, new branch of science are opening. So this particular guidelines do consider all those new developments into consideration, those type of formulations, that type of delivery systems. Like the new drug classification has been expanded to include new therapeutic options such as novel drug delivery system, NDDS, living modified organisms, monoclonal antibodies, stem cell derived drugs, gene therapeutic products, xenografts, and many others. So especially if we talk about novel drug delivery system, lot of new interest has been increased in this type of formulation when we talk about targeted drug delivery systems, and also monoclonal antibodies, as you had seen that for many type of cancers and inflammatory disorders and autoimmune disorders, monoclonal antibodies is considered one of the drug of choices. And again, when we talk about stem cell research, so stem cell research is a very, very new area, and a lot of new developments are happening in stem cell research, especially for those disorders for which there is no cure. If we talk about some psychiatric disorders or many other disorders in which we don't have cure, so stem cell is giving a hope to have some solutions in these areas. But as you know, again, when an area is new, there are a lot of regulatory hurdles. So a lot of stem cell claims claimed by many researchers, not only in India, worldwide, are actually not authentic, and a lot of regulatory loopholes were there. So even stem cell regulations are being covered under this. Then it also defines the orphan drugs in the regulation as drug used to treat condition which affect not more than 5 lakh people in India. So if a particular disease, if it is affecting less than 5 lakh patients in India, it is considered to be categorized under orphan diseases or orphan drugs. Then the provision of waiver of local phase 3 clinical trial. So as you know, for example, if any molecule, okay, for example, I will tell you the current scenario. For example, if there is a company, international company, global company, wants to launch a molecule in India, okay, or they want to do trials in India, the very first requirement is the Indian government is, okay, so you want to conduct a trial in India, so they have to submit minimum phase 1 data in India. That is a must by the government. So they have to actually do these phase 1 trial in their country, and that data, with that data and other preliminary data, preclinical data, they will be filing for approval process. Okay, then only Indian government will give them phase 2 and phase 3 trial approvals after that. So, but there is a provision to waiver of local phase 3 trials in special cases. If the medication is licensed and stored in some other countries, as announced from the time to time, it will be subject to certain conditions and phase 4 analysis will be confirmed. So in those cases, if a drug is already approved in some country for the last 2 years and it is being sold, and based on phase 4 data and safety data, these drugs can be given a waiver. And in case of drugs where particular important unmet needs are there, rare diseases are there, or in case of emergency, okay, for drugs are not available or are available at high cost or orphan drugs. So the phase 4 research criteria may be decreased. So these are some of the waivers which are available. Now during COVID time, how this particular guideline was used, that's a very, very important thing. So how many of you know that Pfizer vaccination is still not available in India? Anyone? Anyone can tell that exactly why the Pfizer vaccination is still not available? Anyone is aware about this? Anyone is aware? Because this was a very, very special clause. I will just show you. So Pfizer, what happened was when India was going through the second wave and of COVID, during COVID time, India was in much dire need of vaccinations. At that time, India has already launched its own indigenous vaccine, that is Covishield, but still there were a lot of shortage and India was in dire need of Pfizer's vaccination. But Pfizer actually was playing a very big role during that time, and they had kept some demands in front of Indian government. And those demands were actually so strict and they were asking for indemnity clause. So indemnity clause is like, for example, the Pfizer has asked two things. First thing what they had asked is a waiver of phase 2, phase 3 trials, that they will not carry out any trials in India and they want to sell directly the vaccines in India. So that was the first demand, what they asked for. The second one was they had asked for indemnity waiver. For example, suppose if Pfizer launched its vaccination in India and if something goes wrong, the Pfizer will not be liable for any of the claims coming out of India. So over here you can see January 2021-23, you can see there are a lot of talks because it became a case study of that some companies are using their market dominance and asking for waivers. Indemnity demand holding up Pfizer jab Indian approval. So you can see in 2021. So basically, you can see over here, Economic Times has covered this particular heading. So Pfizer has signed an indemnity clause with many countries. So they were trying not only with India, but they were trying this particular clause with many other countries. And many other countries, because they were not having any vaccinations, they were actually forced to sign these contracts because they were not having any other option. So because of this indemnity clause with many countries, which they were using, absolutely company from paying any legal cost in case of an adverse event. And as you know now, last 6 months, there are a lot of news, a lot of new buzz, a lot of new interest has been raised in the public and in the science community about long-term side effects of the vaccinations, which is linked with Pfizer. So we are not telling that they may be linked, but definitely there are now new safety aspects which are coming out in the market. So one of the reasons, because of the new clinical trial regulations, which was launched in India, and Indian government not signing this indemnity clause with Pfizer, but because India has launched their own vaccinations. So that was one of the reasons that this particular guideline, you can see, okay, coming back. So over here, in this particular clause, the waiver was not given to the Pfizer vaccination because of the safety concern And also there were concerns with respect to efficacy also, because when these vaccinations were launched in the beginning, all of a sudden, I still remember the claims which are being claimed by top pharmaceutical companies, we will not name them, they were very high, like more than 90-95% of efficacy. And as we know that within 1 year of the vaccine launch, the efficacy level came down drastically. So because of the safety concern, as I told you, this particular guidelines give Government of India a lot of power, that they want to make sure that Indian patients are not being used as guinea pig. That is the only one and sole criteria. The regulators are very strict now. They are keeping a bird eye view on almost all the trials which are happening in the country. And over here, you can see there are now new provisions which have to be followed during the clinical trial. So enrollment status should be reported to the licensing authority on quarterly basis. Now, many of you will be thinking that why enrollment status should be reported. As I was telling you, when Supreme Court, remember, now we are going back again, when the Supreme Court has banned the clinical trials in India, I still remember when we were students and we were just joined this particular industry, when we used to talk to some of the people, there were some case findings where a clinical trial was happening in the country. Just a minute. So there were clinical trials, sorry for the glitch. So there were clinical trials which were happening in the country without even enrolling even a single patient. So the trial was just happening in the documents. There were few case reports like that, that just on the papers, these clinical trials were run. So now the government tells us that enrollment status of these trials should be reported on a quarterly basis, and 6 monthly trial status reports should be sent to the Sugam platform. So now, for many of you, the Sugam platform is very new. I will just show you. So this Sugam platform is by CDSCO. It's an online platform. If you visit CDSCO website, that is this website, and this window which you can see over here, I will just increase the font size. So over here, you can see, click here to visit Sugam. So it's an online platform which gives documentation for all clinical trial related activities. So all the pharmaceutical companies has to make their logins in this particular platform, apply online for new drugs. Over here, you can see, apply online for new drugs, subsequent new drugs, and investigational new drugs. So this is exactly the Sugam platform. I will just share with all of you this particular link, so that whenever you get time, you can actually visit these links and explore these further. These are available via CDSCO website. And also the third point, what it says, that within 30 days of clinical trials early termination, that licensing authority should be notified. Termination of a clinical trial is a very, very important and a very critical point in the whole story. The most important thing we have to remember is that there can be various reasons for clinical trial termination. And as you know, there are three most important persons involved in clinical trials. One is investigator himself, that is a doctor who is performing the trial. The second one is the sponsor, the one who is sponsoring the trial. And the third party, and the third pillar of clinical trial is your ethics committee, institutional review board and institutional ethics committee. So any one of them actually can call for clinical trial termination. For example, if any one of them is having concern with respect to safety and efficacy, they can raise an alarm and they can actually stop and terminate the clinical trial. But in any of the scenario, for example, if it is investigator initiated termination, that he wants to terminate the trial at his end, he has to notify the sponsor and the ethical committee that with the reason why exactly he is terminated. And also the sponsor can terminate. There can be different reasons of termination. For example, whenever a trial is happening, the trial can go up to maybe 6 months, up to 1 year, or even up to 5 years also. So the sponsor is investigating and evaluating the initial data on a regular basis. And based on the initial findings, in case if the sponsor think that the trial is not going as per the need, they can go for early termination if the results are not good enough. Okay, so these type of things can lead to termination. And in case ethical committee also can raise the alarm, and they can also terminate the trial in case if they found that the ethical standards are not being followed, the principles are not being followed regularly in the trials, and a lot of flaws are there in the conduct of the trial. Okay, so in that case, ethical committee also can terminate. Now, the fourth point is very, very important. Compensation should be given within 30 calendar days. So when you talk about compensation, in India, the compensation was not that good in clinical trials since many, many years. But for the very first time, and not only that, even, for example, if a person died in a clinical trial because of the drug molecule, the compensation was one of the lowest in the world, among one of the lowest. Okay. And in many cases, the compensation will not reach the patient itself. It may be taken up by the middle persons. It may not reach exactly the beneficiary. So there were a lot of loopholes was there. And how much compensation should be given, there was not exact any formula was available in those days. But in this guideline, exactly the formulas are being given. I will just show you. Just a minute, I'm just showing you the formulas available for clinical trial compensation. Just give me a second. Because this is one of the most important change which has happened in this particular guideline. Okay, so over here you can see there is a list of the fees which are now being charged, fee payable for license permissions. So over here you can see there is a huge list of fees which are being charged at different point of time by the government. So there is a huge list for that. So you can see that a huge list. Coming to the formula for quantum of compensation. This is one of the most important part of this particular guideline. So over here, I will just give you 1 minute time. So just have a look at this formula, try to understand, then I will be explaining it. So over here, the formula is the formula to determine the quantum of compensation in case of clinical trial related injury or death. So this is the formula which is given. I think for many of you, this will be for the very first time you are looking at this formula. So formula in case of clinical trial related death, which is calculated as B into F into R divided by 99.37. So B is considered to be as a base amount. That is, a base amount is that is minimum amount to be paid. So this is the base amount is 8 lakhs. And F is a factor depending on age of the trial subject. So for example, if a person is young, so the F factor will be higher. And as you go down, as the patient goes old, the F factor decreases. So compensation decreases. And please note that this factor which is related with subject's age is based on another act which is called as Workmen Compensation Act. So this act is available in the internet. You can go through it, which is as per the international standard for the compensation. And R is considered as a risk depending on the seriousness and the severity of the disease, presence of comorbidities, and duration of disease of the trial subject at the time of enrollment in the clinical trial. And it is being rated between 0.5 to 4. So how they are being rated, I will just tell you. For example, if a patient is very, very ill, okay, and he is terminally ill and the chance of survival is very, very less. So the factor of 0.5 is given. So the compensation will be less for terminally ill patients. And expected survival not more than 6 months. The factor is 1 when the patient is with high risk and expected survival is between 6 to 24 months. The factor 2 is patients with moderate risk, 3 with mild risk, and 4 is with healthy volunteers or trial subject at no risk. So patients which are healthy and with no risk, the compensation factor is very, very high. So now I will be showing you an Annexure 1. Give me a second so that you can have a look at that also. So over here you can see in Annexure 1, which is clearly indicating, for example, if your age is 60, so the factor which you are going to multiply is 228. And as you can see that as you grow old, okay, from 16 if you go, so we started with 228. So if you are 40 years age, the factor is 184. So you can see that the factor is decreasing. And as you grow 65 and above, the factor stands at 99.37. So over here you can see in this particular formula, you have a base amount of 8 lakhs, and F is a factor which depends on the age of the patient, and R is a risk factor depend on the critical illness or the comorbidity of the disease. So you have to enter these details into this formula, and you have to calculate how much compensation a patient is eligible for. So this is the very first time this formula is being given, and which is a very, very simple formula which you can calculate. And this is with respect to clinical trial related death. Similarly, there are other formulas which are available, like for example, in case if there is a permanent disability. So for permanent disability, you have a different formula, C into D into 90 divided by 100 into 100. So it depends on the percentage of disability of the subject and quantum of compensation which are required. Then there are compensation for chronic life-threatening diseases or reversible serious adverse events. So over here you can see compensation 2 into W into N, where W is minimum wages per day of unskilled workers in Delhi, and as N is equivalent to number of days of hospitalization. So these are with respect to serious adverse events. So these are some of the things. Coming back to my slides. So I hope these things are getting clear to all of you that what are the new changes, because these are very, very interesting. But as you know, that all the things are not able to cover, but these guidelines, the more you go and the more you read, you will be understanding every day new things in these guidelines. And also you can see over here that from awareness of serious adverse events and death to occurrence onset of SAE, the sponsor SAE reporting timeline was updated to 14 calendar days. So all the serious side effects has to be reported within 14 days. So that is a must now. And not only that, the pharmacovigilance program of India that we called it as PVPI program in India is also actually matching the new drug rule 2019, because the PVPI program which is running in the country is opening new centers on a very, very fast pace, and they are conducting regularly the trainings which are required for the reporting of serious adverse events. So in India, there is a lot of importance now being started giving to reporting and documentation and assessment of adverse drug reactions. And if you see the timelines, that within 90 days, a decision or whether or not to give approval to perform a clinical trial of a new drug or investigational new drug will be made. This is very, very important. So many times what was happening was, as you know, for example, if there is a big pharmaceutical company which is approaching for regulatory approvals of clinical trial. So if you go and discuss in the past, it was consuming a lot of time. And many times it is linked with unethical practices also. So previously they were consuming very, very long times, like even up to 6 months or even up to years in some cases. But now in this particular guideline, the timeline is fixed that within 90 days, a decision has to be made on whether or not to give approvals. And also, if you look at clinical trials of the drug that have already been licensed outside of India, will be processed within 90 days. There is no deemed approval clause. A new drug approval in 90 days, import as well as local manufacturing. Then Suspension and revocation also is a very, very important part. So in this guidelines, as I was telling you already, a lot of regulations are there to suspend or revoke the license. And a central licensing authority issue an order suspending, revoking, or cancelling any approvals, license or registration issue under these regulations, the order must be made public as soon as possible by uploading to the CDSCO website. So over here you can see that because of so many stringent rules which are in place now, the new guidelines has been launched, still there are a lot of loopholes. Over here you can see that contaminated cough syrups from India. This is a news coming from October 2022. I think in my previous lecture also I had shown that the image of India was tarnished because of these wrong happenings which are being reported worldwide. The case is still under investigation and the inquiries are still undergoing and it is in the court of law. But still, this was the company made in pharmaceuticals. And this is a global WHO global surveillance and monitoring system for substandard and falsified medical product information. So this particular page has been taken from WHO, which has issued an alert for these syrups, which you can see in the images, which are being produced by made in pharmaceuticals. So in this particular syrup, which was contaminated, which the government, the local government, which was claiming was because of diethyl glycol, there were a lot of more than 100 kids had died because of these substandard or poor quality or contaminated cough syrups. So this happened in October 2022. And now if you see March 28, 2023, that is exactly after around 6 months. Because all this time, the government inquiries was going on, inspections was going on, and now there is a crackdown on license of 18 pharmaceutical companies cancelled for manufacturing spurious drugs. Crackdown on, over here you can see Z Business News, that is crackdown on pharma companies license of 18 firms cancelled for manufacturing spurious drugs. And also one of the very, very big change now which is going to come and which is going to affect and which is actually going to bring good changes in the Indian Pharma Act. So over here you can see there is a Constitution of Expert Committee to Review Pharmacy Act of 1948, which was launched on March 28. The notice has come. And this is a new committee which is being constituted. You can see the government circular, the Constitution of Expert Committee to Review Pharmacy Act of 1948. So they are also, and these are the members from very reputed institutes all over the country, which includes AIIMS, PGI Chandigarh, Manipal, we have Naipur, Mohali, and many other institutes of eminence. So over here, the term of reference, over here you can see, the term of reference indicates to review the pharmacy education, to review the Pharmacy Act of 1948, to make recommendations for restructuring of Pharmacy Council of India. So these are the term of reference of these particular guidelines. So as you can see over here that a lot of new changes are happening in the clinical trial regulations and at the government level. So these guidelines are being regularly updated. And over here you can see that the global clinical trial markets is booming, and you can see that the market share is going to increase a lot in coming days. And in case if we want to achieve this global growth, and if India wants to become the hub of international clinical trials, India has to perform well. That our regulatory guidelines should be of international standards. And India, over here, I'm just comparing US clinical trial market size so that all the young researchers should understand the need of these new clinical trials regulations. Over here, you can see that US actually accounts for a huge portion of clinical trials worldwide. And in India, the market is ever growing, and the market is growing in double digit. An Indian clinical trial market is expected to grow at around 8.7%. So since 2017 to 2025, it will reach $3 billion industry. And some of the top players like IQVIA, Icon, you have GVK Biosciences, Perexel, okay, so Syngene, and so many other companies are there, and these are the ghost stories of India, and these are some of the areas in which the clinical trials are going on. So this is just a glimpse which I want to show you. And before that, I will be just showing you one more important website. So over here, you have the Pharmacovigilance Program of India, which is controlled by National Coordinating Center, Indian Pharmacopoeia Commission, Ghaziabad. So this is the homepage of PVPI. I will just share with you in the chat box. So over here you can see, for all the young researchers, these are the ADR reporting forms which are available. These are the medicine side effects reporting from patients. Over here you have the mobile applications for the institutes which are having PVPI centers with them, or those who even don't have also, still you can download these apps. And if you are working in a clinical setting, so you can actually report your adverse drug reactions in these apps. So over here you can download these ADR reporting forms. And these are the list of ADR reporting centers. So you can actually find out as a researcher which are the closest ADR reporting center near to you. I think there is some hurdle in opening this file. Some error is coming. But these are the status report also. So over here you have the status reports available. Then another website which is very, very important, which I think Dr. Sarab was also showing you in the last lecture. Because now these three guidelines, that is, one is new drug and clinical trial rule 2019. Then you have national ethical guidelines for biomedical and health research involving human participant. That is this guideline. I'm just sharing you the link in the chat box for the young researchers. So any pharma company, any young researcher, they have to follow these regulations. So one is this, then is PVPI and the new clinical trial rule, which is there. Now I will be just showing you some of the forms which are available, which I had shown you previously. Over here, you can see these are the forms which a pharmaceutical company involved in clinical trials actually fill. So the form CT01, which includes application for registration, renewal of ethics committee related to clinical trial or bioavailability and bioequivalence studies. So now, many of you may be aware also. For example, if your university or your college is having ethics committee, okay? So now it has become mandatory by law that your ethics committee should be registered with CDSCO, okay? And they have to follow the 2017 guidelines principle. So your ethics committee should be registered, and this form is actually for that, so that your ethics committee can get registered. And once, for example, if any researcher is planning to carry out academic clinical trials, the first step is he has to make a protocol as per the new clinical trial rule. Then he has to get approval from the ethics committee. Once you get ethics committee approval, the third thing what they have to do is they have to apply to CTRI. So this is the form CT01, which is being used by ethics committee. Then you have form CT02, that is grant of registration of ethics committee. So mostly these two forms are not to be used by us. Then these are form CT03, that is grant of registration of ethics committee related to biomedical health research. For us, main form is CT04, which I had shown you earlier. This is a form which is application for grant of permission to conduct clinical trial of new drug or investigational new drug. And this particular form is very, very important. This form gives you detailed information that, for example, if a pharmaceutical company is planning to apply for clinical trial in India with the regulator, so what information they have to furnish? This forms gives you everything. So you have name of applicants, nature and constituents, okay, sponsor address, clinical trial site address, name of address of personal responsible, okay, detail of new drug or investigational new drug, the phase of clinical trial for which it is being registered, clinical trial protocol, whether how much fees is being paid, okay, and they have disclosed all the documents or not. So, and undertaking. So this is CT04. Then you have CT4A, information to initiate clinical trial rule, okay, as a part of drug discovery, research and manufacturing. Then you have form CT05, application for conduct of bioavailability bioequivalence study. So as you know that clinical trial and bioavailability bioequivalence trials are different actually. Anyone can tell bioavailability bioequivalence trial, like how exactly they are different and which phase, whether we require healthy volunteers or patients for conducting BAB trials. Anyone? Anyone can tell? So for example, in India, as you know, India is the biggest hub of generic clinical trials. For example, India is the biggest hub of generic markets of the drugs. Okay. So what happens is, for example, if there is a molecule, okay, which is manufactured by, discovered by XYZ company, so the company files a patent protection for that particular molecule, and patent protection is there for 20 years, long years. So what happens is, once the patent is expired, so all the companies which are interested in that particular molecule start doing research and start developing a generic version of that particular molecule. So now for this particular generic version, you have to prove that your version of generic drug is almost equivalent to the parent molecule. For that, you are going to carry out bioavailability and bioequivalence study. And in India, there are so many CROs you must have heard about, which are actually doing BAB studies. And it's a huge market out there. So once you do the BAB studies, you can sell your generic version of molecule to US, Canada, or any other country, because you have to follow the regulatory requirements of BAB in that country. But you can sell that. So form CT05 deals with that. Submission of documents related to BAB trials. Then you have form CT06, that is permission to conduct trial of new drug or investigational new drug. Okay, so these are the permissions which are required. Then you have form CT07. These are the permissions for BAB trials. So there are so many things which you can actually go and look for this in this guidelines. So these are the grant of registrations. Okay. So in the last, I will just show you one more thing, CTRI. So this is the CTRI website, that is the Clinical Trial Registry of India. So as per the new clinical trial rule, all your studies, whether it is academic or research, before you enroll your patients, you have to register your research protocol with this particular website. And they will give you one CTRN number also, which I think I had shown you previously. So this site becomes very, very important. And also they give you a sample protocol also, or to submit in this clinical trial protocol. Okay, so anyone is having any questions? So this is the summary of the clinical trial market reports. So as you can see over here, the market size is increasing. The revenue forecast for Indian pharma industry is increasing. And that is where the need of these guidelines will help us boost the sales. Okay, help us attract international talent. And I think during COVID time, there is now a lot of interest has been again generated for repurposed drugs. So repurposed molecules are actually a different area. So for those who are very new to this repurposed molecule, as I was telling in my past lecture also, so repurposed molecule is actually those molecules which are already there in the market, which are already approved actually for some other purpose. Okay, for example, hydroxychloroquine, which is an anti-malarial molecule. Okay. Then you have ivermectin, which is an anti-helminthic molecule. And as you can see that during COVID time, these molecules were used left and right. So they were repurposed to be used for COVID-19 virus. So in order to use an existing molecule for a new area, you need to carry out phase 3 trials. You no need to carry out preclinical trials, phase 1, phase 2. You can directly start with phase 3 trials, and you can submit your safety and efficacy information and outcome measures directly to the government. Okay. So this is what we were talking, the pharmacy of the world. So India is having one of the biggest industry markets, and Indian pharma market is growing very, very rapidly. 8 out of 20 global generic companies are from India, and 55% of exports, highly regulated markets. So you can see over here, this is why the India is called as pharmacy of the world. And this is the reason why we require these guidelines upgradation. And also there are a lot of big changes which are coming even at ICH levels and other regulatory norms. So I think in coming days, there are a lot of changes which are going to happen in this industry. And also, especially because of artificial intelligence, which is now taking over the world as a whole. So a lot of ethical challenges, a lot of regulatory changes are going to happen in the field of pharmacy, the field of clinical trials in the coming days. And also the digital era, the privacy, the confidentiality clauses. So in ICMR ethical guidelines, these are being talked very, very high levels. And privacy issues, digital data, repository, data mining. So these are some of the new things which are coming up in these areas. And that is where many, many pharma companies are looking for experts from these areas. So that's all from my side. If anyone is having any questions, I will be happy to take few questions quickly. Anyone is having any questions?
Hi, everyone. So any questions? Thank you, sir.
Okay, so I have a question, Ajit. Okay, Ravinder has asked, okay. So if a clinical pharmacist is working in a hospital and want to start a registry for a disease under the guidance of doctor working in the same hospital, or and where to apply? Okay. So the very first thing is, I think Dr. Ajit himself is an expert in registry. So I will just give some inputs that, for example, if you want to start a registry, so the very first thing is, if you are planning to start a hospital-based registry, you need to get an approval from your own hospital in case if they have a ethics committee in place. So that is the very first step which has to be put in place. So then, because we are talking about a registry, so there will be an expert committee which should be formed in the hospital itself, because what part of the registry, what type of data you are going to collect, and how this registry is going to help in the future. Yes. And who is going to control. So there are a lot of ethical issues, there are a lot of security, because if you are recording this in digital mode, so the digital data security is also a concern. So you require help from the IT personal help if you are going to create this registry digitally. So definitely subject experts and domain experts are required, and definitely ethical approval is a must, especially who is within your range of your own hospital.
Yes.
And I think Dr. Ajit, if you have any
absolutely, sir has said rightly. Yes, absolutely, sir has said rightly. If it comes to the registration, you have to start with your hospital, or you have to start with your institution or university ethical committee, that is called as Institutional Ethical Committee, IEC. First, you have to plan accordingly, like what kind of data you are looking for, where you are going to store and secure the data, because data management in registry is one of the important thing. So you have to assure that your data is secure and you are getting the what we say, the good security or third party to secure the data. Or if you are developing your website, that the website and the data anonymity is completely taken care. And then start with your university, and first of all you will take IEC approval, and then you will go to CTRI if you are trying in India. So these two approvals are necessary. Other than that, you don't need any kind of other approvals to start registry. That's from my side. And definitely, if it is a multi-centric registry, then every center has to register in their own IEC. For this, with the valid central IEC submission. Central IEC means wherever it has been originated. Like if I am originating or I am starting the registry from my hospital, then first IEC approval will be there from my center, and then it will be registered in CTRI, and then with both of the approvals we can extend it to multiple hospitals, multiple centers, and each and every center has to take the ethical approval from their own site as well.
Yes, and one more thing I will just add to this. For example, if you are planning to start a registry, you should know that whether the government is running their own registry in that area or not. So for example, if you are looking for cancer, so Government of India have their own cancer registry. So where all the hospitals has to actually report the data to the national body, and especially when you talk about infectious diseases like tuberculosis or HIV. So there are national registries which are available. So you have to even consider those registry. Otherwise, what will happen is registry is not an easy task, because it is a very, very tedious task, very detailed task, and you require a lot of resources and manpower, because starting is an easy task, but maintaining this registry for years and years together require a lot of resources, manpower, maintenance cost. So you plan accordingly, and if you are not matching with the national goal, it may not be useful. Because for example, you are collecting some data, but the Government of India is asking for some other data for their registry. So either there will be duplication of data or repeat of data, which is unnecessary waste of resources and manpower. So do consider all these factors while planning what type of registry you are looking for. But definitely, as India is going towards the digital era, and I think very soon Government of India will have its own, I think already Government of India has launched its centralized health data documentation, but it is slowly growing. Very few people are aware about it, but slowly and slowly, like in US, or we have a nationalized linking of health records. I think with the Aadhaar or with the upgradation, and during COVID, the COVID app, you can see that the India has shown that all the monitoring and tracking can be done. So I think the government is taking that lesson and taking forward to other diseases also. Okay, and I think one more question is there: how hypothesis is generating for drug repurposing? Okay, so when we talk about drug repurposing, so I think what the researcher wants to ask is like identification, like how you identify or hypothesize.
Yes.
So for this particular thing, I think a detailed literature search is a very, very important. And the past experience of those molecules, for example, if you talk about ivermectin, so anti-helminthic has, because even when I was also looking at the literatures, so many a times you will come across some literatures where anti-helminthics like ivermectin, albendazole has actually worked against many viruses also. So a lot of, you can say drug discovery, like computer-aided drug designs, and you can say docking studies, and these type of computer designs are being used to identify these potential molecules. And once there is a fit of these receptor of the viruses or these particular diseases, whichever you are talking about, so those molecules will be shortlisted. So once you have this shortlisting of these molecules, then you will be going for an extensive literature search with those molecules. And then only you will come out with your own hypothesis, okay, related to those. I think that background check is very, very important. Okay, anyone else?
Yes, thank you. Any questions? You can open your mic, you can ask, guys. I think no questions, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ajit.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Good night.